Good morning. Good morning. Ooh, that's loud. Thank you, Cindy. I always love it when Cindy plays when I talk. We've known each other for a bit. We've got a great chemistry together. I like that. So, good morning. My name is Jay Pryor. If you don't know me, I'm a lay member of this congregation. I'm also an executive coach, and I've been coaching people for over 15 years now. And one of the things I love about coaching and about my industry is that everything we do is a practice. Everything I teach is a practice. And part of spiritual and personal development can be broken down into things that we practice. When I came into Unity, one of the things that I found amazing and full of grace was that Unity gave me this practice. They just handed me this practice, right? That really, really works. And what I know is one of the things that I love is I like to make things really practical. And so with my clients, I do the best I can to just break things down into very simple steps. My book is called Lean Inside, 7 Steps to Personal Power. It's in the bookstore. You can pick it up. And you'll notice that my book talks all the way through it about how we practice things, right? And so one of the things I like to explain to people is I like to come from a perspective sometimes of neuroscience, because our brains are so powerful, right, and they run us, and I believe if we can understand how our brains function and how those things work sometimes, it makes things less ambiguous, right? It also gives us the power of knowing, just like Cindy said, that there's not anything that we can't accomplish if we really understand that your brain is essentially plastic, right? Your brain is essentially plastic. So what I want you to know is that the reason my talk is called Practice Makes Permanent is because what we know about the brain and neuroplasticity today is that anything that you practice can recreate what they call your cortical map. Now, I didn't have time to pull you a slide of a cortical map, but each of us has our own cortical map, and it looks like a topographical map in this part of your brain. And Cindy brought up being classically trained as a musician, for example, right? And so let's say, for example, if Cindy could remember back to the day she very first picked up the violin, if you were to do a brain scan of her cortical map, the areas of her finger dexterity, and they're literally, like, for each finger, there's a different region, right, on your cortical map. So for each finger, as she has grown and learned to be able to play the piano, if we had a brain scan going, we could literally see those things light up as she's playing, right? So where the regions of the brain are, where her fingers are, right? Now the other parts of her brain, her hippocampus has grown bigger around her memory of being able her muscle memory, the hippocampus has grown larger. And when she first started, what happened as she started to learn was synapses in the brain that are circuits, right? These are circuits, started to fire. And the more these circuits fire together, the more they become permanent, right? They just get wired up, literally wired, right? And as she's developed mastery over her music, then those have sprung out into axons and dendrites, which I've recently learned a lot about, which is essentially the more masterful skill. It's when the brain starts making those connections, and then that becomes less, it's like she doesn't have to think now, I have to move my finger there, right? It just happens automatically, right? That's the mastery that she has. So knowing that your brain, right, can master and learn anything if we practice it, right, we practice it, how is it that we all know, right, we know this, and this is a fascinating thing to me about human beings, is that we know things, and that doesn't make one bit of difference, right? It makes no difference to us that we know, right? And so knowing is never going to make a difference, and if we want something, what we do know is that we have to practice, right? And what I love about a spiritual practice is that for me, being happy and having a powerful life includes a spiritual practice that I have to practice. right? And the beauty of unity is they spell it right out for us, right? They spell out this practice for us. So I know that there's a class coming up in the 5 principles, and so I think it's perfect right now that this is what we're talking about. And this is unity's 5 basic principles, right? The first principle is that there's only one presence and power active as a universe and in my life, God the good. Now, there's not a practice, like to go practice, like I'm going to go lift a weight like you do in a gym for this. This is a knowing practice. It's a reminding, right? And so everything else that we practice behind this reminds us that there is only one presence and power in the universe, God, the source of good. And next thing we remember is that essence of God is inherently good, and this is called the Christ, which is expressed through Jesus, right? So Jesus is our way shower, right? Jesus, in other words, when Cindy first started as learning the violin, she didn't just do it on her own. You probably had a music teacher, right? People hire me as a coach because they need a leader. Right? Well, if you're really invested in learning something, you're not just going to go all half-cocked by yourself, or if you do, it won't last very long, right? If you want mastery in something, you find a coach, right? You find a teacher. You find somebody who's done it better than you. Now, unity has given us that, and unity, we call that Jesus, right? Jesus is the person who did it better than us. And in unity, that's all he is, right? And that's one of the things I love about unity, right? Jesus is my teacher, and anything Jesus couldn't do, I can do, right? That's the whole point here, right? Now, let me speak for myself. I am way far off from knowing myself as the person who someone could touch my cloth and be healed, right? Like, I'm not that guy, right? Yet, right? Yet. But I got somebody that I can look to go, that guy did it, right? That guy did it, so maybe I can too, right? It's just, all that Jesus is to us is that violin teacher, right? That person who has done it better than us and who can do it in front of us, so we have a coach, right? So part of having a powerful practice in anything is getting a coach, finding someone to teach you how to do the things, right? If you've never worked out in a gym, I know this, I was just talking to my nephew about this the other day. He's a guy who has been pretty athletic his whole life. He was a wrestler when he was younger, and he's always just been, like him, really. He's always just a little muscly guy, right? Well, now he's hitting 35, right? Just had a baby. and for the first time in his life, he's starting to have he's starting to be like, whoa, I need to do something with my body. But he's never worked out in a gym because he never had to, right? He doesn't even know how to. He doesn't know what to do at a gym, right? I didn't either. I wasn't somebody who knew what to do when I went to a gym. I had to find a personal trainer to help me figure out what to do, right? So we do that. We look to our way shower, and in this case it happens to be Jesus, right, as someone who does it better than us, right? The next principle is that we're co-creators with this force, creating reality through thoughts held in mind. I create. This is the part I want to get to. First of all, that word God that freaks people out sometimes, in my world is this substance, right? Eric Butterworth talks about this. Eric Butterworth uses the analogy that God is the ocean and we are a wave, right? That wave cannot be taken out of the ocean, right? It's impossible. That wave is always a part of that ocean. And I love Butterworth. I also like, we were talking downstairs about Wigglesworth, all the people that talk about the universe as this substance. And this substance is hard to get our heads around sometimes, because especially those of us who have been indoctrinated into believing that God is a person, that we've anthropomorphized God. It's a little more difficult to get the universe or God as the substance. But I love that, because that substance is everywhere all the time. Right? You can't ever take a square inch out of anywhere and not find all the molecules of the universe. They're everywhere all the time. This is where science and our new thought principles start to blah, 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 right? This is when they start to go blah, right? Science and new thought start to meld when we start looking at what is the substance of the universe. Butterworth knew this, right? The substance of the universe can never not be there, right? To get that? The substance, it can never not be there. It's always there. I was explaining earlier that I like to think of it, and I don't know if this works for you because it may or may not, but I like to think of it as the perfect bite. Right? So Jessica and I used to eat at a place called La Madeleine in Washington, D.C., and they had the best Caesar salads we'd ever had, right? And at the end of the Caesar salad, we would talk about this when we were first dating, and we thought everything you did was cute, right? Oh, it's so cute, right? But she loved to, we would talk about getting the perfect bite, right? The perfect bite had that perfect piece of crouton that's not too big and just enough salad and just the perfect amount of chicken, right? And it was the perfect bite. See, the universe is always the perfect bite. There's never a piece missing, right? You're never getting gypped out on a piece of the crouton, right? It's always there. Always the perfect bite. Always that perfect substance, right? And starting to practice this idea and it's practicing these ideas. Now, how do we practice this and understand that we create? Is through prayer and meditation, right? We align our hearts with mind denials and affirmations. In my book, I say that I think there's one denial that everybody needs, like only one, really. And that denial is, I give that thought no power. I give that thought no power. Affirmations, I really believe in, and in my book I talk about this, where I think that we have to, when we're, all there is, and here's the practice, I'm going to give it to you in a nutshell. Here's the practice. I have a thought that doesn't align with who and how I want to live my life, right? I have to come up with a different thought, right? That's an affirmation, right? That different thought is an affirmation. Now, in my book, I explain that I believe you have to believe the affirmation, right? If you don't believe the affirmation, it sets off your BS, right? Also known as your belief system, right? It clashes with your BS. If the affirmation you start to say, right? So let's say, for example, I want to be, Cindy's practicing and she wants to be a great musician, and she's hitting that part in everybody's lives when they start to practice something where it's starting to get hard, right? Or it's starting to run up against something, right? And instead of quitting, right, or listening to the voice that says you're never going to do this, right, instead Cindy has to say something else. But she can't say, I'm the best musician on the planet, when she feels cruddy, and that doesn't jive with her BS, right? So instead she can say something she believes, like, I really want this for myself, right? If she starts saying, I really want this for myself, instead of, I can't do it, right? I guarantee you that what starts to happen is there's a drive there to do something different, right? And that's all there is. So we replace our yakety-yak thought with affirmations that we believe. That's the practice. And you practice it over and over and over again. And you connect up, right? Through prayer and meditation. You are connecting. I change that to I connect, right? Because when I'm connecting and taking the time to connect is when I'm going to be doing things more in alignment with myself. Lastly, through thoughts, words, and actions, we live out the truth we know. In other words, I live. So this is the practice, right? Now that can get really complicated, right? So I broke it down into these words. God is, I am, I create, I connect, I live. God is, I am. God is, I am. That is one of my mantras when I go into meditate. I say to myself, God is, I am. In other words, God is that substance, and guess what? I'm a part of that substance, and I can't ever be taken out of that, right? That substance is everywhere I am. Now, my friend Enola, in fact, that we're singing I Release and Let Go, reminds me always of Enola Charity, and she was my first skin-on New Thought teacher, right? Enola Charity was my first skin-on New Thought teacher, and she said the words to me for the first time that I heard, which is, I am all that God is, but God is... Excuse me, hold on, let me get this right. God is all, I am not all that God is, but God is all that I am, right? So I can't be taken out of God. You can't take that out of me, right? You can't cut me out no matter what. And the practice of that is so important and so powerful. And what I want you to know is the more you practice, the better you feel, right? The more you believe this, the better you feel. And what happens as, just like anything, you know how some of you might have proficiency with working out or being a musician. Now, what would happen if Cindy stopped practicing, right? Would she forget how to play the violin? Yeah. She might over time. I don't think she would ever forget at this point, right? Once you attain mastery, right, you never really forget, but you get rusty. right? She would not ever forget, but she would get rusty, right? And so the good news is we build up cred, right? Same thing happens at the gym, right? When I first started riding a bicycle a couple years ago with a friend of mine, something I'm committed to doing several times a week because I love it, right? I love riding the bicycle. But when I first started riding a bike again, 5 miles was a big deal. I was like, well, man, I just went down to 5 miles, right? Now 5 miles is like, I only got 5 miles in, right? But and even after like this whole season went by and I hadn't ridden a bike in a while, the first time I hopped off and only got 5 miles, it still wasn't a big deal, right? Because I've built up some credibility, I've built up some energy, I've built up some momentum, right? Cindy, with her mastery, has built up credibility. Now, the way that works with spiritual development is if you're someone who's willing to be rigorous with your practice, right? Because for some of you, your practice is I show up here on Sunday. That's it, right? And if that's your practice, then I want you to let you know that's like showing up at the gym and then really not doing much and leaving. Showing up at the gym, sitting there, listening to the talk, and then leaving, right? Like, that's exactly the same as going to church once a week, listening to the talk, and leaving, right? And then never thinking about it again, right? If you're going to have a practice, you got to do this on a daily. But I promise you that if you build a practice that is yours, right, here's what I encourage people to do, is to build a practice that is yours, like that really has your heart sing. And know that that practice may get stale as you grow. You may need to add new things. When we did the Shadow to Light course here, I incorporated that practice, the Shadow to Light prayers, into my practice. And I almost said daily practice, but I don't want to lie to you. Because I wish it was daily. And when it's daily, I'm flying. But I will tell you lately, it hasn't been daily, right? But that practice for me to, turn 4 directions and pray for all beings, creating a world that works for all beings, for me right now is very powerful. Now, I'm not going to say that will last me forever. It might get stale. But the point is, I built up enough cred, right? I've flexed this muscle enough, and I'm a trained person in my spiritual development that I can go a couple days without, and I've got some credibility. I'm still okay, right? And if I go too long, I start to forget. Right? I start to forget. And I start to believe that voice in my head rather than the truth. And the truth that we know is that there's only one presence and power in the universe, and I'm part of that. And so it's the practice, right? It's the muscle flexing and the practice that keeps me grounded in the truth of who I am. Otherwise, I go around making up truth, right? I have a thought, and then I go gather evidence that it's the truth, right? I might have a thought that I'm not a good dad or whatever, and then I'll start thinking about that. Next thing, and I'll yell at them, and then there's my evidence, right? And I can create that as my truth. And anything you think, you can create as your truth. And so the practice of spiritual development and creating a muscle flexing practice around it is to keep us creating the truth, the real truth, which is there is only one presence and power, and you're part of it. And that muscle flexing practice allows you to remind yourself daily that all that yammer is just not true. And the coolest piece about it is you add the humanity to it, and your cortical map actually changes. Right? So we could do a brain scan of any of you and see your cortical map, and if you went out and learned a new musical instrument or learned a spiritual practice, when we did it 6 months later, it would look different. Right? This is the good news. For those of us that are older, when we were like in 21 or 22, we were told our brains were fixed and fried, and however much pot you smoked in high school just fried you out, man. You're just done. You fried some brain cells in high school, you're screwed, right? So that is not true, right? Your brains are elastic. They shift and change, and your input is what shifts and changes and creates your cortical map. And what you practice makes permanent. And so I want to encourage you all to find something that inspires you, or find something that has you lifted up and grounded at the same time when you do it, and start creating a practice, right? Because practice always makes permanent. And that is all I have to share with you today. So, yeah. Thanks. Oh, I did forget this. As you're practicing, don't forget that this is all about progress, not perfection, right? My book is in the bookstore if you'd like